My hand froze on the mailbox handle when I realized it was empty again. Not just empty. Wrong. The hinges were too loose, the interior scratched in ways I didn't remember, and there was a faint smell of machine oil that didn't belong there. I stood on my porch in Portland that October morning, the rain drizzling cold against my neck, and felt something shift in my chest. A tremor. A warning. I was 58 years old, and I had lived long enough to recognize the moment when the world stops making sense. My name is Margaret. I've been a nurse for 37 years. I know how to read the small signs, the subtle shifts in vital signs, the barely perceptible change in a patient's breathing that signals something is wrong. I know how to trust my instincts, even when I can't yet articulate why. And standing there, staring into that empty mailbox, my instincts were screaming. I went back inside my small craftsman house, the one I'd bought after my divorce from Robert 15 years ago, and sat at my kitchen table. The morning light filtered through the lace curtains my mother had given me, casting intricate shadows across the wood. I tried to remember the last time I'd actually received mail. Not bills, those I paid online. Not magazines. I'd canceled those subscriptions years ago. But checks, my pension checks, my consulting work payments, those should be coming through. I pulled out my phone and called my bank. The woman on the line was polite, professional, and utterly unhelpful. "Your account is in good standing, Miss Chen," she said. "All deposits have been processed normally." "What deposits?" I asked, my voice steadier than my hands felt. There was a pause. I could almost hear her frowning through the phone. "Your monthly pension transfer and your consulting payments. They've been deposited every month for the past, let me see, 2 years at least. That's as far back as I can pull up on this system." My chest went tight. "I never authorized direct deposit for those." Another pause. Longer this time. "Ms. Chen, according to our records, you authorized direct deposit 18 months ago. There's a form in your file signed by you, and the account it goes to is listed as, well, it's a joint account. Margaret Chen and David Chen." David, my son. I don't remember hanging up the phone, but I must have, because the next thing I was aware of was the silence in my kitchen and the sound of my own breathing, sharp and quick. I was 58 years old, a woman who had raised a child alone, who had paid for his college education, who had never asked him for a single thing in return. And somehow, without my knowledge, without my permission, he had been collecting my money for 18 months. I sat there for a long time, long enough for the morning light to shift and change, long enough for the rain outside to ease into a drizzle. Long enough to realize that I had no idea what else I didn't know. David had always been a careful child, precise. Even as a boy, he kept notebooks filled with lists, things to do, things he wanted, things he'd accomplished. I used to find them tucked under his mattress, organized by category and date. Robert, his father, had called it obsessive. I called it focused. I encouraged it. I thought it meant he'd be successful. He was successful. He worked in finance, something to do with investments and portfolio management. He made good money. He'd never asked me for anything after he turned 18, which I'd always taken as a point of pride. My son, independent. My son, thriving. He lived in Seattle, about 3 hours north. We saw each other maybe 4 times a year. We talked on the phone occasionally, though the calls had become more infrequent over the past few years. I attributed that to him being busy, to the natural distance that grows between adult children and their aging parents. I never questioned it. I never asked why he didn't seem as warm as he used to. why conversations felt stilted, why he always seemed to be checking his watch. I had convinced myself that was just how things were. That afternoon, I drove to the bank in person. I needed to see the paperwork. I needed to see my signature on that form. The branch manager, a woman named Patricia with kind eyes and the exhausted expression of someone who'd worked in customer service too long, pulled up the file on her computer. She turned the screen toward me, and I leaned in to look. The signature was mine. I was certain of it. The particular way I looped my G's, the slight slant to the right, the pressure point where I always pressed harder. It was all there. It was my handwriting. When exactly was this authorized? I asked. Patricia clicked through a few screens. The form is dated 18 months ago, July 15th. 18 months, July. I thought back to July of that year. David had visited. He'd come down for a weekend, and we'd gone to the coast like we always did. We'd had lunch at a little restaurant in Cannon Beach, walked on the beach, talked about his work. Or rather, he'd talked about his work while I listened. He'd been quieter than usual. I remembered that now. More withdrawn. He'd suggested we stop by the bank before he left to head back to Seattle. He said he needed to make a transaction, and he asked if I minded waiting in the lobby. I'd waited in the lobby. "Did my son come in with me?" I asked Patricia. "When I authorized this?" She glanced at the form again. "There's a note that says a family member was present as a witness." My mouth had gone dry. "I need to see the original form, not a scan. The actual paper." Patricia hesitated. "I can request it from our archives." "It might take a few days." "I need it today," I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears. Tight, controlled, the way I spoke to difficult patients in the ER when I needed them to listen carefully. "This is important." Patricia made some calls. 30 minutes later, she placed a manila folder on the desk in front of me. The signature on the form was mine, but it was wrong. The pressure was inconsistent. The loops weren't quite right. The G in Margaret had too much flourish, something I never did. I'd been signing my name the same way for 40 years. I knew my own handwriting the way I knew my own face. Someone had forged my signature, and I was almost certain it was my son. I didn't confront him that day. I didn't even drive home. Instead, I sat in my car in the bank parking lot and made a list. Not on paper. I didn't want anything physical, anything that could be found. I made it in my head, the way I used to memorize patient charts before everything went digital. What I knew? David had been receiving my pension and consulting payments for 18 months. He had forged my signature to authorize direct deposit. He had been intercepting my mail. I had no idea how much money was involved. What I needed to find out, everything else. I drove home in the rain and went straight to my office, a small bedroom I'd converted into a workspace when I started doing consulting work for the hospital. I pulled out my files. I had copies of all my invoices, all my consulting contracts. I added up the numbers from the past 18 months. $37,000. That was my consulting money. My pension was another $1,200 a month. Multiply that by 18 months. $21,600. Nearly $60,000. I sat back in my chair and felt something crack open inside my chest. Not anger, not yet. Something more fundamental than that. A kind of profound disorientation, as if the ground beneath my feet had shifted and I was still trying to find my balance. I needed to think clearly. I needed to understand what had happened and why. I'd spent 37 years in the medical field, learning to diagnose problems, to look at symptoms, and work backward to the cause. This was no different. This was a puzzle, and I needed to solve it before I did anything else. I called the post office and asked to speak to someone about mail delivery. It took 3 transfers, but eventually I reached a supervisor named Marcus who seemed to take my concerns seriously. "You're saying you haven't been receiving your mail?" he asked. "I'm saying I think someone has been intercepting it," I said carefully. "Specifically, checks and financial documents." There was a long pause. "That would be mail theft, Ms. Chen. Do you have reason to believe someone in your household is doing this?" "I live alone," I said. "But my son has a key to my house." "I see." Another pause. "We can put a hold on your mail and have it delivered to the post office for pickup only. That would at least stop any future interception. But if mail has been stolen, that's a matter for the police." The police? I hadn't thought that far ahead. The idea of filing a report against my own son, of involving law enforcement, of making this official and real and irreversible, it felt enormous. It felt like crossing a line I couldn't uncross. "Let me think about it," I said. "Can you put the hold in place first?" He could. He did. And just like that, I'd taken the first concrete step toward confronting my son. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling and tried to understand how we'd gotten here. I thought about David as a boy, about the notebooks under his mattress, about the careful lists he kept. I thought about his childhood, about his father leaving, about the way I'd tried so hard to be enough for him, to be both mother and father, to provide everything, to never let him feel the absence that Robert had left behind. Had I done this? Had my attempts to be the perfect mother somehow created a son who felt entitled to take what wasn't his? Or had something else happened to him? Something I'd missed? I got out of bed at 3 a.m. and went to my office. I pulled up my email and searched for messages from David. I found them easily. There weren't many. Most of them were brief, perfunctory. "Hi, Mom. Can't make it to dinner this month. Work is crazy. Thanks for the birthday call. Hope you're doing well." The emails from 2 years ago were warmer, more personal. He'd told me about a woman he was dating, about a promotion at work, about his plans to buy a condo in Seattle. But then, gradually, the tone had shifted. The emails became shorter, less frequent, more distant. I searched my email for anything about finances. Nothing. No messages about joint accounts or direct deposits or anything that would have warned me what was coming. I found his address book entry. I had his phone number, his email, his work phone. I had his address in Seattle. I knew his birthday was April 12th. I knew he liked Thai food and had an allergy to shellfish. I knew he'd taken piano lessons as a child and quit at 14. I knew he'd broken his arm falling off a bike when he was 9. But I didn't know my son. Not really. Not in any way that mattered. I spent the next week gathering information. I called my consulting firm and asked to speak with the accounting department. I explained that I needed to verify all payments made to me over the past 2 years. They sent me a detailed report. Every check had been deposited into the joint account David had opened in my name. Not a single one had gone to my personal account. I contacted my pension administrator. Same story. Every deposit for 18 months had gone to the same joint account. I requested copies of all statements from that account. The bank was reluctant. It wasn't technically my account, they said, even though my name was on it. But when I explained the situation, when I carefully laid out the evidence of fraud, they relented. Patricia, the branch manager, pulled the statements herself and printed them out for me. She didn't say anything, but I could see the sympathy in her eyes. She knew what this meant. The statements told a story of systematic extraction. Money coming in regularly, money going out in smaller increments, transfers to David's personal account, payments to credit card companies, withdrawals from ATMs. It looked almost normal, almost reasonable, except for one thing. I hadn't authorized any of it. I spread the statements out on my dining room table and tried to see a pattern. There had to be a reason. There had to be something that explained this beyond simple greed or entitlement. David made good money. He didn't need my pension. He didn't need my consulting payments. So why? I picked up the phone and called his office. "David Chen, please," I said when someone answered. "May I ask who's calling?" "His mother." There was a pause. Then, "One moment, please." I waited. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I hadn't planned what I was going to say. I didn't even know if I was going to say anything at all. Maybe I just needed to hear his voice. Maybe I needed to know if he would sound guilty or defensive or completely unaware. "Mom?" His voice was cautious, confused. "Is everything okay?" "I need to see you," I said. "In person. This week." "What's wrong? Are you sick? Did something happen?" "I'm fine," I said. "But we need to talk. About some things. Important things." There was a long silence. I could almost hear him thinking, calculating, trying to figure out what I knew. "I can't come down this week," he said finally. "Work is really busy right now. Can this wait until next month?" "No," I said. "It can't. I'll drive up to Seattle tomorrow." "Mom, that's not tomorrow," I repeated. "I'll come to your office at noon. We can talk in person." I hung up before he could argue further. My hands were shaking. I went to the kitchen and made myself a cup of tea, but I couldn't drink it. The liquid was too hot, or maybe my throat was too tight. I couldn't tell the difference anymore. I packed a bag that night, clothes for 2 days, my medications, my phone charger. I didn't know what would happen when I confronted David. I didn't know if he would admit everything or deny it or try to explain. I didn't know if this would be the beginning of reconciliation or the end of our relationship. I didn't know anything except that I couldn't live with the uncertainty anymore. I couldn't wake up every morning wondering what else I didn't know. What other lies had been built into the foundation of my life? I drove to Seattle in the early morning, when the roads were still quiet and the rain was just beginning. The drive took 3 hours and 20 minutes. I knew this because I timed it, because I needed to know exactly when I would arrive, because control, or the illusion of it, was the only thing keeping me together. David's office was in a high-rise in downtown Seattle, all glass and steel and the kind of modern architecture that made me feel old. I took the elevator to the 34th floor. My reflection stared back at me in the polished metal doors. A middle-aged woman, with gray streaking her dark hair, lines around her eyes, the kind of face that had spent decades looking at other people's suffering. I looked tired. I looked scared. The elevator dinged. The doors slid open. David was waiting for me in the lobby. He looked like he always did. Expensive suit, expensive haircut, the kind of grooming that came from having money and knowing how to spend it. But there was something in his face I'd never seen before. Something tight and controlled and afraid. "Hi, Mom," he said carefully. "Hi, David," I replied. We didn't hug. We stood there in that sterile corporate lobby, surrounded by the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of phones ringing, and we looked at each other like strangers. "Let's go somewhere private," I said. He led me to a conference room on his floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Puget Sound, gray and vast and indifferent. He closed the door behind us, and the sound of the outside world disappeared. "I know about the account," I said without preamble. "I know about the forged signature. I know about the mail. I know about all of it." David's face didn't change. He sat down in one of the leather chairs and folded his hands on the table in front of him. It was a gesture I recognized, something he'd done since childhood when he was trying to appear calm. It meant he was anything but. "I can explain," he said quietly. "Then explain," I said. He took a breath. "I was helping you." I waited. I'd learned long ago that sometimes people need silence to tell the truth. They need space to fill with their own words. "Your finances were a mess," he continued. "You were getting older, and you weren't thinking clearly about money. You were spending too much, not saving enough for retirement. You were vulnerable. There are people out there who prey on women like you, women your age who are alone. So you decided to prey on me yourself?" I asked. My voice was very quiet. "That's not what I was doing," he said, and for the first time, there was heat in his voice. Defensiveness, anger. "I was protecting you. I was saving your money for you. I was making sure you'd be okay." "By forging my signature?" "By taking control of the situation," he said. "You weren't going to listen to me if I asked. You were too proud, too stubborn. You always have been. So I did what I had to do." I sat down across from him. My legs felt unsteady. "How much of my money is left?" He hesitated. "Most of it. It's invested. It's growing." "That's not what I asked." $23,000, he said finally. "Invested in a portfolio I've been managing. It's going to earn about 8% annually. By the time you're 70, you'll have—" "I don't care about projections," I said. "I care about the fact that you stole from me, that you forged my signature, that you've been lying to me for 18 months. "I didn't steal," he said, and his voice had taken on a quality I recognized from his childhood, the tone he used when he was trying to convince himself as much as me. "It's your money. I was just managing it for you. Without my permission. Because you wouldn't have given it," he said. "You never listened to reason. You never let anyone help you. You've always had to do everything yourself, and you've always been so determined to be independent that you couldn't see when you needed someone to take care of you." I looked at my son. This man I'd raised, this man I'd sacrificed for, this man who had systematically deceived me, and I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, exactly, though there was plenty of that. It was something more complex. It was grief. It was the realization that the relationship I'd thought we had was not the relationship that actually existed. "When did this start?" I asked. "Not the account. Before that." "When did you start thinking it was okay to lie to me?" David didn't answer immediately. He looked out the window at the gray water below. "Dad used to tell me that you were too trusting," he said quietly. "That you let people take advantage of you. That you were naive about how the world worked. He said I needed to be smarter than you. That I needed to protect myself from becoming like you." Robert. Of course it went back to Robert. "Your father was a lot of things," I said carefully. "But he wasn't right about that, and even if he was, that's not an excuse for what you've done." "I know," David said, and his voice cracked slightly. "I know it's not an excuse, but I didn't know how to stop. Once I'd done it, once I'd opened the account and started moving money, I couldn't figure out how to undo it without you finding out. And the more time passed, the more money accumulated, the harder it got to tell you. So I just kept going." "You kept lying," I corrected gently. "You kept forging my signature. You kept intercepting my mail." "Yes," he said. "I did all of that." The confession hung in the air between us. I'd spent a week preparing for this conversation, imagining all the ways it might go, And I'd never imagined it would end with him simply admitting the truth. I'd expected him to deny it, to minimize it, to blame me for not being more careful with my finances. But instead, he was just admitting it. "I want my money," I said. "All of it. Liquidated and transferred to my personal account. Today." "Mom?" "Today, David." He nodded slowly. "Okay, I'll call the investment company. It might take a few days to process the liquidation, but I can have it done by the end of the week." "Good," I said. "What happens now?" he asked. His voice was very small. I didn't have an answer for that. I'd been so focused on uncovering the truth that I hadn't thought about what would come after. What does a mother do when her son has betrayed her? What does she say? How does she move forward? "I don't know," I said honestly. "I need to think about it. I need to talk to someone, a therapist maybe, or a lawyer." "Are you going to press charges?" he asked, and I could hear the fear in his voice. "I don't know," I said again. "Right now, I just need my money back and some time to process this." I stood up. The meeting was over. There was nothing else to say. "Mom, wait," David said as I headed for the door. "I'm sorry, I really am. I thought I was helping. I thought I was doing the right thing." I turned back to look at him. My son, the boy I'd raised alone, the man I'd been so proud of, the person I'd thought I knew. "I believe you," I said. "But that doesn't make it okay. And it doesn't make it not what it was." I left his office and took the elevator back down to the lobby. I sat in my car for a long time before I started the engine. The rain was coming down harder now, and the windshield blurred with water. I turned on the wipers and watched the world clear and blur and clear again. The money came back to me over the course of the next week. David liquidated the investments and transferred the funds to my personal account. The bank confirmed receipt. The numbers were all there, most of the $60,000 I'd been missing, plus a small amount of interest that David's investments had earned. It was a hollow victory. Having the money back didn't undo the betrayal. It didn't erase the 18 months of lying. It didn't restore what had been broken. I took a week off work. I called my supervisor and told her I needed personal time, and she didn't ask questions. In all my years at the hospital, I'd rarely taken time off. I was the reliable one, the one who always showed up, the one who could be counted on. I spent that week in my house, moving through the rooms like a ghost. I made tea that I didn't drink. I watched television shows whose plots I couldn't follow. I sat in my office and looked at the consulting work that was piling up in my email, and I couldn't bring myself to respond. On the third day, I called a therapist. Her name was Dr. Patricia Morrison, and she had an opening on Friday afternoon. I went into her office with a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago and told her everything. I told her about David, about the forged signature, about the 18 months of deception. I told her about Robert and the way he'd poisoned our relationship even after he was gone. I told her about the guilt I felt for somehow creating a son who thought it was acceptable to do these things. "Do you think you created him?" Dr. Morrison asked. She was a woman in her 70s, with gray hair and kind eyes, and the kind of presence that made it easy to talk. "I don't know," I said. "I raised him alone. I worked full-time as a nurse. I was always trying to balance being a good mother with being financially independent. Maybe I was too focused on independence. Maybe I didn't teach him about boundaries." "Or maybe," Dr. Morrison said, "he made his own choices as an adult, and those choices are his responsibility, not yours." I wanted to believe that. I wanted to accept that I wasn't responsible for what David had done, but it was hard. It was hard to separate myself from the guilt, to stop looking for ways I could have prevented this. "What do I do now?" I asked. "Do I press charges? Do I try to repair the relationship? Do I just move on?" "What do you want to do?" Dr. Morrison asked. I thought about that. I thought about my son, about the boy he'd been, and the man he'd become. I thought about the 18 months of deception and the way it had fundamentally changed how I saw him. I thought about the possibility of reconciliation and whether I wanted it. "I don't know," I said. "I'm angry. I'm hurt. I'm disappointed." "But he's still my son." "Those things can all be true at the same time," Dr. Morrison said. "And you don't have to make a decision about any of it right now. You're allowed to sit with this for a while. You're allowed to feel whatever you're feeling without having to resolve it immediately." I left her office feeling slightly less lost. Not better exactly, but less like I was drowning. I had permission to not know what came next. I had permission to be angry and hurt and disappointed without having to fix it all at once. The following week, I returned to work. I threw myself into my shifts at the hospital, grateful for the structure and the purpose. I was good at being a nurse. I was good at taking care of other people. It was taking care of myself that I was struggling with. On my third day back, I was working in the emergency room when a woman came in with chest pain. She was about my age, maybe a few years younger, and she was alone. No family with her, no one to hold her hand. I took her vitals and got her settled in a bed, and as I was adjusting the monitors, she grabbed my arm. "It's bad, isn't it?" she said. "I can tell by your face. You're a nurse. You know how this works. It's bad." "We don't know anything yet," I said gently. "Let's get the tests done and see what we're dealing with." "I don't have anyone," she said. Her voice was small and frightened. "My kids are busy. They've got their own lives." I didn't want to bother them. I looked at this woman, and I saw myself. I saw the independence that had been a strength for so long, but which had also left me isolated. I saw the guilt of asking for help, the shame of needing someone. I saw the way we women of a certain age had been trained to take care of everyone else and never ask for anything in return. "You're going to call them," I said, not a question, a statement. "You're going to call your kids, and you're going to tell them what's happening, and if they're worth anything, they'll come. And if they don't, then you'll have me. I'll be here." She looked at me with tears in her eyes. "Really?" "Really," I said. She called her daughter. The daughter came within the hour, panicked and guilty and grateful all at once. The woman's EKG came back normal. It was anxiety, not a heart attack. She was going to be fine. But as I watched her hold her daughter's hand, I thought about David. I thought about the ways we fail each other and the ways we try to protect each other, and how those two things can look almost identical if you're not careful. I didn't press charges. I made that decision after 3 weeks of therapy and a lot of sleepless nights. It wasn't because I forgave David or because I thought what he'd done was acceptable. It was because I realized that pressing charges would hurt me more than it would hurt him. It would mean police reports and court dates, and having to relive the betrayal over and over again. It would mean turning my son into a criminal, and I wasn't sure I was willing to do that, no matter how angry I was. Instead, I set boundaries. I changed the locks on my house. I removed David from any accounts or documents where he had access to my finances. I told him that I needed time before we could have any kind of relationship, and I didn't know how much time that would be. He accepted this. He didn't argue or try to convince me otherwise. He just accepted it, And I think that acceptance was the beginning of something. Not forgiveness exactly, but maybe the possibility of it someday. I continued therapy. I continued working. I continued living my life, which had become somehow both smaller and larger than it had been before. Smaller because I'd lost something I thought I had. A relationship with my son that I now understood was never as solid as I'd believed. Larger because I'd learned something crucial about myself. I was stronger than I thought. I could survive betrayal. I could survive disappointment. I could survive the shattering of an illusion. 3 months after I discovered the truth, David called me. It was a Saturday morning, and I was in my garden, planting winter vegetables. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up the phone. "Hi, Mom," he said. His voice was tentative, like he wasn't sure I'd want to talk to him. "Hi, David," I said. "I've been seeing a therapist too," he said, "for about a month now. And I've been thinking a lot about what I did and why I did it. I want you to know that I understand it was wrong. Not just technically wrong, but fundamentally wrong. I violated your trust, and I lied to you repeatedly. I don't have an excuse for that." I didn't say anything. I waited. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," he continued. "I'm not asking you to forget what happened. I'm just asking if maybe eventually we could talk about it. Really talk about it. Not in a way where I'm trying to defend myself or explain it away, but just honestly." I looked at my garden, at the dark soil and the green shoots coming up through it. I thought about how things grow, about how they need time and care and the right conditions. I thought about whether relationships could grow again after they'd been damaged. "Maybe," I said. "Not yet, but maybe eventually." "That's fair," David said. "I'll wait." After we hung up, I went back to planting. The work was meditative, repetitive, grounding. I was putting seeds in the ground, trusting that they would grow into something nourishing. It was an act of faith, really. Faith that the future would be better than the past. Faith that healing was possible. Faith that I was strong enough to move through this and come out the other side. I didn't know if David and I would ever have the kind of relationship we'd had before. I didn't know if trust, once broken so thoroughly, could ever be fully restored. But I knew that I would survive this. I knew that I would continue to live my life with integrity and strength. I knew that I would never again ignore the small warnings my instincts sent me. And I knew that the empty mailbox, the one that had started this whole journey, would never be empty again. Because I was paying attention now. I was watching. I was awake to my own life in a way I hadn't been before. It's been 2 years now since I discovered what David had done. We've had that honest conversation he asked for, and then several more. We've worked with our therapists to understand how we both got to that place. Him feeling entitled to manage my life. Me feeling so independent that I didn't notice when someone close to me was crossing boundaries. The relationship is different now. It's more careful, more intentional. We don't pretend everything is fine when it isn't. We don't hide from difficult conversations. It's not the relationship I thought we had, but it might be more real than what existed before. I still think about that morning when I discovered the empty mailbox. I still remember the feeling of the ground shifting beneath me, the disorientation of realizing that my life was not what I thought it was. But I also think about what came after, the strength I found, the boundaries I set, the ways I learned to take care of myself, even in the face of betrayal. I'm 58 years old, and I've learned that you never stop learning about the people you love. You never stop discovering new ways they can hurt you or surprise you. But you also never stop having the capacity to heal. You never stop being able to move forward. My mailbox is full again now. Bills and magazines and the occasional check. I receive them all. I open them all. And I never take for granted the simple act of mail arriving at my door. A small, ordinary miracle that once, for a brief time, I thought had been taken away. If you're in a situation where you suspect financial abuse or fraud, especially from someone close to you, trust your instincts and reach out to someone you trust.